Hello everyone, it's Von Dinnerbell and it's time for my review on Have a Nice Death. I like to do reviews some time after its launch to give developers a time to push an update if they see the problems. Once I see one drop and give it some tests, it's time for more accurate thoughts. Have a Nice Death was designed by Magic Design Studios and falls in the category of a side-scroller roguelike action game. I'm going to start up with some of the side flavor of the game. The graphics are clean enough and add adequate ambience, but other than that, are just kind of there. The scenery exists, but honestly, it's ignorable. The enemies look good and unique to their biomes, and their attack animations are pretty clearly defined, which is always nice. Doing a war biome with attack planes and a pollution biome with sludges is super immersive. The food biome hits me way too close to home with fighting hamburgers, though. Come on, they're way too delicious.
Cheeseburger and paradise. Medium rare with mustard, be nice. Heaven on earth with an onion slice. I'd like a cheeseburger and paradise. Ah, no, bad cheeseburger.
The spells the characters use are pretty, fun to use, and have good flash to them. The music hits well as you cut through your enemies, and even more importantly in a game like this, never really gets in the way or feels repetitive even on your 50th run, although you could just as easily turn it off and slam to your favorite destroy it all music without missing important audio cues. The game has its share of witty characters with distinct personalities. Good story all throughout, with the premise of being an overworked boss who decides to cut through everything in his way to get a vacation. Pretty extreme around my office at least, but hey, you do what you gotta do. If you read too much into it, it may be a little bit to the how does this really matter side of things, but it's designed to be quirky, not serious. They print many quest styles of story arcs overall the game, and it does create some funny bits of brief situations. You can definitely get content here, and I would recommend talking to everyone for quite some time just to see these interactions and the repeating words start. Things do get very repetitive with bosses and NPCs, just repeating the same lines over and over and over and over and over and over. But that's a curse of many of these plays. That's a curse of many of these gameplays, and it's really not much of a negative as much as an expectation. You can just skip all these NPC talking in the boss's dialogue, only take a few seconds, so it's fine. Now let's talk about the big stuff. Let's talk about the actual playing of the game. Gameplay is quite snappy and responsive and is a general joy to actually control with actions feeling well in your control. You hit a button and that thing just works. Hitboxes are completely fair and never really feel cheesy. This is just plainly a clean and crisp gameplay experience. There is a decent build diversity where many different tank and build setups can work to a degree, and this will need to be touched on in a bit. Spells seem generally underpowered as a whole, but mostly because many spells seem to take a huge chunk of your mana for some reason, no matter what you do, to the point that you can't really chain them reliably. The damage output ratio seems kind of off kilter there. I mentioned tank in a special note because the curse system has a line built mostly around defenses and retaliations, but there really is no true tanking weapon with maybe the exception of the parasol. And the game still focuses on getting enemies down quickly and efficiently, and the tanking doesn't really have that. But tanking can work if optimized well. Multiple weapon choices exist for your primary main attack, where they're played being quite a bit different from each other. Choices must be made at the get-go, and you will get 3 per run. This is cool. Even if you don't get your favorite weapon, you get forced to learn a different one. I feel like these kind of games need that kind of a system. I would like to voice some confusion as to the decision to have the main scythe weapon be a constant 100% up choice, and is also a very solid pick. I would probably like to see the scythe thrown into being randomized with the rest, since I didn't quite realize this immediately. Once I did see this, I just immediately picked a scythe over and over again because I learned how the weapon works and it's consistent. Felt like it took some of the big choices away outside of just because I want to do it, I'm going to do it. The developers seem to plan updates since they have holiday quests embedded in the game that seem to be time triggered. It would be a huge win to update some of these curse lines and maybe rotate a few things just to make the game fresh. I would like to see a tank system that makes you truly a wall. Like you get hit in the face and it just doesn't really do much. I feel like I should mention that the curses are upgrade skills. In red is mostly physical, blue is tankiness. retaliation and counterattacks, and yellow is mostly spell related, mostly all mana. I mentioned that in the in a recent paragraph, so I figure I want to throw that in there. The difficulty of the game is probably in the upper middle. The first patch cut a whole wing off the run, and that made it quite a bit easier, but more importantly, shorter. The scaling of the game's imminent breakdown difficulty slider feels way off, however, with a 2 to 4 line being quite a bit more difficulty adding than 5 to 8. I've only seen up to 10 personally, but I did look into the later ones. There are 15 levels, and the last one is pretty much set up as a hardcore. Look what I did with 10 to 14. Once again, not looking like any real game changers. It's pretty wild, but most of the things in the middle just kind of the same run with a little cleaner or annoying micromanagement, or downright makes no effect to your general run at all. For example, there's a difficulty slide that adds 5 damage whenever you switch weapons. Like, okay, no one ever really does that, so it's a non-factor. The elements in the game strike very close resemblance to real life, and for some people might be entering a terrain of too real or distressing. The developers themselves put that warning into the opening screens, but it felt worth mentioning. The roguelike elements of the game are pretty mild. There are 2 modes of gains and Have a Nice Death: XP levels and gold ignites, which is the game's meta currency. The XP levels are highly impactful to your power, and consequently will have the game become easier. Grinding this out was incredibly quick and did not take very long, which is generally fine. You'd like to get to the power anyways. The gold ignites are a real offender here. These are used to buy new weapons and food unlocks, which is common in many games of this type. The issue is that these purchases happen incredibly quick and are used very little to never. I believe in my playthrough I had most of the unlocks all done within 10 hours, mostly because I was trying to do the discounted quest methods, which the game points you to do, but by the end I was earning enough ignites to just buy them outright without really caring about the breakpoints. There is a cosmetic system to dress up your death hall, but its cosmetic system is kind of whatever. And you also drain that pretty quickly too. Food and weapon things you buy aren't really encountered very much in the game. You can see them in the refrigerator once per biome, and even that. So there's so many of them you never really see it. The game is guilty of off-screen gimmick attacks. Nothing could be more frustrating than having enemies winding up an attack when you do not even know it's there yet. This is true in this game for both melee and ranged enemies, where they either shoot their shot off screen or you just are moving forward and right into an enemy that's already lunging at you as it appears. It will happen in quite a few runs, and it always feels like a gotcha hit. It won't end your run necessarily, but it can break your contracts early game or completely chunk your life bar that's really hard to replenish. There is a contract system that starts each round, and it's really kind of a non-factor of rolling the choices until you just get the least punishing ones. The more difficult ones offer the exact same rewards in a lot of cases as the easier startup ones, but with steeper consequences of failure, which just seems like a bad oversight. Balancing these so that taking one of a negative influence offers more positive than the free ones with no negativity really should be looked into. With that being said, the 4th contract tier actually does have great choices, although there still is a concept of just clicking the reroll button over and over again until you get an easy one that you like. 3 sets of 2 worlds. Progressing through the game is 3 sets of 2 worlds each that never shuffle, promotes just taking the same path you know over and over for the experience of doing the runs quickly with virtually no reason to deviate and see the other side other than just because. So as you progress through the game, you do your first biome, then you do the second set, which has 2 biomes, and you pick that one, and then you get 2 more biomes, and you pick those 2, and you get 2 more. There's no rotation, there's no shuffle. There are unlocked things you can do to choose from, but they only realistically take a couple runs to do. I feel personally that the Grimes pollution to Hector illness and fiction warfare wanes are just way easier in every regard than their counterparts, and would thusly become the norm, which can spell doom for these type of games life cycle. Once something is solved, there's no rotation. even if you pick your own, and even if you pick your own floor routes, like if you wanted to do the other ones, this will still probably inevitably happen because you will get used to those runs and those rotations, and you're going to want to do them over and over again. Realistically, I think it would be cool and way more interesting if they just threw all 6 of the main worlds into a pile, and with every time you do a run, it cycles through them until you have a different 2 every time to pick from. It would kind of force some kind of selection. It would still kind of come down to which world is easier at a selection point, but at least force some variance. Otherwise, there's no natural reason to do so. There's an upgrade item called Prismisiums. They are so strong and so rare, it kind of overshadows everything else. Talking about an item specifically doesn't really play into the rating of a game too much. Like, it's not often you go to Final Fantasy and like, I'm going to rate potions. But this item is something different. It is so strong that it kind of overshadows a lot of the other parts of the game, because the Prismisiums are used to upgrade weapons as part of your play run, and you find them sub-randomly by the world selection screen. But yeah, a stronger pickup would be a lot better, especially how in later tiers you must have them to even do any upgrades. This is compounded by the fact that it has a negative feedback loop with the contract system I mentioned earlier, in which you just roll over and over again, because you can get Prismisiums from the contract system, and so you just click roll over and over and over again until you get 2 or 3 Prismisiums off the rip, which makes both the contract system and the Prismisium system kind of feel cheap and static and stalled before you even start a run. I have 2 thoughts here. It would be nice to have increased the cost of the contract reroll exponentially. So when you click the button, or to simply lock the choice when you see, that way you can't just spam reroll contracts to get what you want. You kind of have to play with what you see sometimes. And it would also have the second issue of solving some of the infinite gold ignites that with nothing to buy. I have over 25,000 of them in my inventory and nothing to do with them. The room selection, I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, and I mentioned it just on the Prismisiums there. The room selections inside of a biome are completely a no contest with selection, with there always being the right answer and all other things are wrong. I'm not going to get into a whole breakdown of these, but I can if people want me to later. This is kind of a neutral problem of mine, but it's still a little dull, where you always see your list of choices and there's always going to be a choice that you want. And the other choices are none. This is a real problem when it comes to Prismisiums that I talked about, because you see a Prismisium as an auto pick. And then a secondary problem is you get these sets of choices that are all dead, where none of them matter, and then you feel like you do a whole wing and there's not a single upgrade or anything for you. The curse system is the real rogue element. I mentioned it earlier, been a couple times lately. The curse element system is the real rogue element in the game, and it's not balanced very well. There was a recent patch that tried to make a dent in the underwhelming blue and yellow curses, but it only really amounted to a band-aid. Red curses are just overwhelmingly better due to them being almost all raw % damage, which is what this particular game is pretty much always about. Tanks and magical curses just don't hold up at all in the overall game. Now, in the combat is very fun, so red curses are just fine, and there is a diversity even within the red system, so you can play a little differently in different ways. But still, it'd be nice to see a wider range of spell damage options. Like, all the yellow options are just mana, 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 but there's no spell damage to really do anything with it. And the blue options are just tanky options, which can be fun if you actually can become like a real wall. I mean, that would be fun. It's not useful in that way. I know I did say earlier that all builds are possible, and they are. All builds are possible, but tank and like the blue and yellows just feel vastly inferior and generally just make harder runs for the sake of it.
So before I get into the next segment, I'm going to put this up for a bit. This is how I do my grading system, and in general, what each rating kind of means to me personally, right? Kind of a brief outline. It's not concise per se, but it's so you have a general idea. I'll leave this up for a second, let you read it, And then as I get done with this, as you finish it, I will talk about where we're headed. Alright, so this is the point of the matter. We're looking at $24 for a realistic 50 to 80 hours of content for enjoyers of this type of game before feeling burnout or staleness. I myself have 100. I know it seems like I talked a lot of negatives about the secondary parts of the game, but at its core, it's still a very well put together experience. If the developers decide to take another lick at polishing some of these features, which in a lot of cases are just numbers, it could be amazing. As it stands, I would rate this a firm B to B+. With around 100 hours sunk in this game, I never truly felt like I had a boring run, even with some of the repetitiveness of it all, and I feel like my money was well spent. The down score is that beating the run partially comes down to skill and practice, but more so in the fact that getting the same core playstyle talents and doing the same run does get dry. With all that being said, feel free to comment down below on your thoughts on Have a Nice Death, and if you agree or disagree. It's my first video, and if you enjoyed my thoughts, please consider doing the whole like, follow, bell stuff, and if you want to catch me live, feel free to hang out with me over on Twitch, Von Dinger Bell, where I'll likely be beating my head into some kind of content where you can make fun of me doing. Until next time everyone, Dana's done.